22BBY. Planet Teth. A Bomar Order monastery sits at the crown of a sheer cliff, held by 2 Confederate battle droid battalions. The only way in is straight up. 2 AT-TEs begin to climb, not with ropes or grappling hooks, on their own legs, footpads locked against vertical rock, hauling armor and firepower up a half-mile cliff face while taking incoming fire from DSD-1 dwarf spider droids below. One walker loses front leg grip when battle droids on single trooper aerial platforms cut its footing. The other keeps moving. Ahsoka Tano jumps onto the stricken walker's windscreen and deflects the fire. The grip holds. They reach the top. That sequence from Star Wars The Clone Wars has 1.9 million views. The question it leaves is a physics question, not just a fiction question. What does it actually take for a machine that size to grip a vertical surface and keep climbing? Strip out the tractor field feat in the lore, run both walkers through real-world engineering conditions, and which architecture survives the stress test? 2 different design philosophies produced 2 very different answers. In Legends continuity, the AT-TE drew its logic from creature biology: 6 legs, low profile, feet built to adhere to any surface. The AT-AT drew its logic from doctrine: 22.5 meters tall, 4 legs, armor the official Star Wars Databank describes as used as much for psychological effect as they are for tactical advantage. The comparison this setup demands shows up in every comment section on Star Wars Walker videos. 3 voices keep returning. The most reply-generating comment in this space, 83 likes, 16 replies, is simply, "If only we had walkers here on Earth." That's an audience already making the real-world bridge. The second voice says the AT-TE is the peak. If it had been given Imperial-era armor and a fusion engine, it would have been even better. That preference, as it turns out, tracks with the engineering more closely than it might seem. The third says legs are just a worse form of movement. 14 likes, but it deserves a technical answer rather than dismissal. On flat ground, legs genuinely are less efficient than wheels and tracks, and a serious comparison has to reckon with that before declaring a winner. The actual question is which leg configuration performs better when the terrain is no longer flat, and that answer depends entirely on the physics of what the legs are doing during locomotion. The All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer, AT-TE, 6 legs, as the separatist droid armies named it, is the Galactic Republic's primary battle tank throughout the Clone Wars. Built by Rothana Heavy Engineering and first deployed at the First Battle of Geonosis, it carries a crew of 8, 1 pilot, 1 co-pilot and spotter, 1 vehicle commander, and 5 gunners. Capacity is 20 clone troopers, split between forward and rear compartments, with acceleration compensators under the seats. Cargo capacity is 40 tons. Some variants carried 2 folded AT-RT scout walkers in the rear hold. The gunner, who operates the dorsal mass driver cannon, fully exposed on top, has the least enviable position on the vehicle. Current Disney canon places the AT-TE at 9.57 meters tall, roughly 3 stories, with a hull running 22.02 meters. Legend sources put the height closer to 5 meters. The cross-sections guide originally established 5.32 meters. The discrepancy traces to different scaling methodologies applied to animated and film media. What both versions agree on is the fundamental proportional characteristic. The legs are low to the ground relative to the body, and the official databank states the engineering trade-off plainly. Low legs reduce top speed, but provide increased stability. Maximum speed is 60 kilometers per hour. The stable geometry trade-off is written into the spec sheet as though the designers wanted to be explicit about what they prioritized. The body is 2 armored halves connected by a flexible concertina midsection housing the power generators. That joint lets the front and rear halves articulate independently as terrain shifts beneath the vehicle. Each of the 6 legs carries triple-jointed hydraulic limbs. The result is a machine that adjusts its body geometry in real time, each half responding to what the surface beneath its legs is actually doing, independent of the other half. Watching it cross broken ground in the animated series, or in DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2 on the Geonosis map, the two-halved articulation is immediately visible, the front section pitching one way while the rear section compensates the other. Each footpad contains terrain sensors and tractor field generators. Canon documents two distinct capabilities: general surface adhesion via tractor fields, and the specific ability to magnetize the feet for metal surfaces. Both matter. During the Battle of Deveron, Anakin Skywalker deployed two AT-TEs, Walker's AT-AT 30773, per the Wikipedia record, directly onto the exterior hull of a Munificent-class star frigate in deep space vacuum. Admiral Yularen's objection was blunt. Those walkers are designed for terrain, not space. Captain Rex's reaction to the magnetized foot detail was acknowledgement that it was a good call. The deployment succeeded. This is a vehicle whose design envelope extends from cliff faces to the outside of capital ships. Armament covers 4 ball turret laser cannons at the front, 2 at the rear, and the dorsal mass driver cannon accepting payloads from bunker busters to sonic charges. Armor deflects small arms fire. Tank smasher rockets can pierce the hull and destroy the propulsion mechanisms. The Empire retained AT-TEs into its early years, before phasing them out for taller, four-legged designs. Some survived into the Galactic Civil War in rebel hands, and at least one fought in the defense of Kuat drive yards. The low center of gravity and wide six-leg stance produce a specific immunity the AT-AT lacks. Tow cables wrapped around those legs don't produce a clean ankle disruption cascade. The geometry doesn't permit it. The all-terrain armored transport runs in the opposite direction at nearly every design point. Height is 22.5 meters, established in current canon by Inside the Worlds of Star Wars trilogy. That number evolved upward. Early 1980 marketing materials for The Empire Strikes Back estimated around 50 feet, roughly 15.2 meters. West End Games supplements settled on 15.5 meters through the 1980s. Modern canon pushed it to 22.5. The Empire kept building this machine taller as the doctrine hardened. The AT-AT's height isn't an engineering optimization, it's a strategic statement. The databank says it directly. These massive constructs are used as much for psychological effect as they are for tactical advantage. That's the official summary. An AT-AT cresting a ridgeline is an event. It fills a target's field of view before firing a shot. 4 legs. A narrow support polygon formed by 4 contact points, supporting mass elevated nearly 5 stories above the ground. The walker carries 40 troops and mounts 2 heavy laser cannons alongside 2 medium repeating blasters in the heavily armored head. Blast impervious armor. The licensed reference, Star Wars Head-to-Head, notes that the AT-AT's height gives its gunners a targeting advantage. The elevated fire position is real. Height delivers field of fire. It also relocates the center of mass as far from the ground as possible. Canonical top speed matches the AT-TE at 60 kilometers per hour, but that figure applies only on flat, stable terrain. The Battle of Hoth, depicted across The Empire Strikes Back, its novelization, and recreated in Star Wars Battlefront 2, shows the AT-TEs advancing at a deliberate, measured pace. That gap between official spec and visible behavior isn't a continuity error. It reflects what dynamic stability management at that mass and height actually demands in practice. The ankle vulnerability is canonical. At Hoth, Luke Skywalker ordered Rogue Group specifically to use harpoons and tow cables targeting the legs because armor was impervious to blasters. A line wrapped around those ankles disrupted the leg geometry enough to topple the machine. On Simoon 1, Darth Vader destroyed a rebel-commandeered AT-8 by severing its rear left leg. The entire 22.5-meter machine went down. 4 contact points, long legs, center of mass at elevation. 1 disrupted limb collapses the system. Engineering estimates place a realistic AT-AT above 1,000 metric tons. At that mass and height in Earth gravity, the center of gravity sits far above the narrow support polygon formed by 4 leg contact points. The righting moment required to prevent tipping grows with height. The 4-leg geometry, already narrow relative to the machine's height, becomes the single most vulnerable structural element in the entire design. On level ground, wheels win. The debate here is about what happens when the terrain isn't level, and that's where leg count stops being an abstract preference and starts changing the underlying physics. Hexapod robots move in what engineers call a tripod gait. One tripod, front left, middle right, rear left. Opposing tripod, front right, middle left, rear right. While one tripod swings forward, the other 3 legs stay planted. 3 points define a plane. At every moment during locomotion, the hexapod has 3 ground contact points, forming a support triangle that contains the machine's center of gravity. A 2014 peer-reviewed paper from the University of Technology, Baghdad, Static Stability Analysis of Hexagonal Hexapod Robot for the Periodic Gates, states this directly. Hexapod robot needs to stay statically stable at all the times during each gate, in order not to fall with 3 or more legs continuously contacts with the ground. The support polygon is always maintained. The machine doesn't require active computational correction to stay upright. The geometry handles it. Freeze the control system mid-stride, and the robot stays standing. Quadruped locomotion works differently. A 4-legged machine in a walking gait regularly enters phases where 2 or at most 3 legs contact the ground. Momentum and active balance correction prevent falling. This is dynamic stability, continuous computation compensating for the fact that the geometry alone doesn't guarantee the machine won't tip. The control problem is harder. Failure modes arrive faster, and at increased scale, the computational and physical demands compound. The 2001 RHEX paper, RHEX, a biologically inspired hexapod runner, published through Carnegie Mellon University's Robotics Institute with researchers from CMU, McGill University, and UC Berkeley, funded by DARPA under contract N66001-00-C-8026, states the architectural advantage directly. Greater ease of traversal over broken terrain, exploiting passive dynamic stability. Vertical balance is far less of an issue. RHEX uses 6 compliant C-shaped legs with 1 motor per hip, 6 actuators total, and travels at better than 1 body length per second over terrain few other robots could manage. The stability is structural rather than computational. 3 real machines map the AT-TEs design logic across scales from proof of concept to payload-capable hardware. RHEX 2001 is the proof of concept. Breadbox-sized, DARPA-funded, architecture-validated in field conditions against terrain few comparable robots could manage. Loran 5 is the rough terrain specialist. Built at the FCI Research Center for Information Technology in Karlsruhe, Germany, it was designed for unstructured terrain where conventional vehicles fail. A 2021 IEEE paper is specifically titled Adaptive Walking Pattern Generation with Damaged Legs for the 6-Legged Robot Loran 5. The abstract confirms the hexapod continues walking with a damaged leg, restructuring its gait in real time. In one documented test case, a hexapod with a front leg reduced to half its original length dropped from 26 centimeters per second to 8 centimeters per second immediately following damage. Then, after approximately 20 minutes of adaptive recalibration, recovered to 18 centimeters per second. That's 69% of pre-damage speed from a half-amputated limb. Multiple peer-reviewed papers across IEEE, Transactions on Robotics, Robotica, and MDPI confirm the principle across different platforms and failure conditions. Losing 1 leg out of 6 restructures the gait, not the mission. The Timberjack walking forest machine is the scale and payload evidence. Developed from 1996 by Tech Oy, the Finnish R&D unit of Timberjack, later acquired by John Deere's Construction and Forestry Division, and publicly demonstrated in 1999. This was a working, six-legged harvester built for forests where tracked vehicles cause soil compaction and terrain damage. A prototype, never commercially deployed at scale, but it proved Hexapod architecture works at real machinery size, carrying real payload in real field conditions. The honest counterpoint? More legs means more joints, and more joints means a higher aggregate probability of mechanical failure somewhere in the system. The AT-TEs' 6 legs with triple-jointed hydraulic limbs represent a minimum of 18 major joint assemblies. One peer-reviewed reliability analysis states plainly that increased joint count in hexapod legs raises the failure rate and reduces overall leg reliability. The hexapod survives individual failures better because losing 1 leg out of 6 leaves 5 legs and a restructured tripod intact. But it starts with more components that can fail. Both sides of that trade-off are real. Fewer legs means fewer gate combinations and a simpler control architecture, and that's a genuine engineering advantage worth treating honestly. A quadruped manages 4 legs, cycling through stance and swing phases with a smaller combinatorial space than 6 legs require. Research on quadruped robotics identifies 4-legged systems as offering a recognized trade-off between stability and control complexity. Simpler to implement, with less computational overhead on flat terrain. The Loron 6 research acknowledges the hexapod limitation directly. If vast stretches of flat terrain need to be crossed first, the hexapod architecture carries a real efficiency penalty. Boston Dynamics Big Dog, developed from 2005 by Mark Rabert's team, demonstrates the practical ceiling of quadruped dynamic balancing executed well. Big Dog recovers from being pushed sideways, slipping on ice, and navigating rough surfaces through active stabilization. Rabert established the theoretical foundation for dynamic stability in legged robots in the 1980s at MIT's Leg Lab before founding Boston Dynamics in 1992. On moderate terrain, at the scale Big Dog operates, that dynamic recovery is genuine. The historical ceiling for large-scale quadruped locomotion is the GE walking truck. Designed by Ralph Mosher at General Electric, GE had submitted the original technical proposal to the U.S. Army in 1965 and publicly unveiled in April 1969. The cybernetic anthropomorphous machine was a 4-legged quadruped weighing approximately 3,000 pounds. One prototype produced failed to exceed 5 miles per hour despite considerable engineering effort. It demonstrated that large-scale quadruped locomotion was feasible in principle, and that sustained practical operation was a separate, harder problem. Scale that problem to an AT-AT's mass and height, and dynamic balancing stops being a computational inconvenience. The ankle vulnerability at Hoth wasn't a design oversight the rebels cleverly discovered. It was a structural consequence of placing over 1,000 metric tons of mass on 4 dynamic balance points, each connected to a center of gravity 5 stories above the ground. One footnote from the first order is worth noting briefly. The ATM-6, the all-terrain mega-caliber 6, introduced in The Last Jedi, has front limbs that visually appear to brace against the ground in a lower, wider forward stance than a standard AT-AT's upright front legs. The film's reference materials associate the design with simian predators. Specific mechanical specifications for those front limbs aren't confirmed in primary canonical sources, so this remains inference from visual evidence and reference material description rather than documented fact. Gorilla-style columnar knuckle walking is established in primate biomechanics as providing a more stable support structure than alternative postures. The visual suggestion is that the First Order's engineers were reaching toward a wider, lower forward support base, solving, implicitly, the stability problem the standard 4-legged upright architecture produces at scale. The fiction arrived at the same conclusion the engineering literature did, just through a different route. Drop both walkers on Earth, same terrain, same mission. On flat, prepared ground, where dynamic balancing can be sustained without disruption, The AT-AT has real advantages: simpler gate control, fewer joint systems, a commanding field of fire from elevated weapons placement, blast-impervious armor. It was designed for a scenario like Hoth, and it executed that scenario. Those advantages are documented and genuine. On terrain that changes, a cliff face, broken rock, a slope where one leg catches wrong, the AT-TEs architecture holds. 6 legs maintaining 3-point ground contact produces static stability without active correction. That stability is structural, built into the geometry rather than computed in real time. Our Hex established this at laboratory scale. Loron 5 demonstrated it in rough terrain and kept walking after leg damage. The Timberjack walking machine demonstrated it at payload-carrying size. The fault tolerance literature across multiple IEEE published papers confirms the principle on multiple Hexapod platforms. Losing 1 leg out of 6 restructures the gate, not the mission. A study published in Nature found specifically that climbing favors the tripod gate over alternative, faster hexapod gates. The demand of vertical surface contact pushes locomotion toward exactly the pattern hexapods use by default. The AT-TEs architecture is suited to the cliff at Teth because the tripod gate's 3-point geometry is what climbing physics actually requires. An AT-AT on the same surface would be placing far higher adhesive loads on fewer contact points, with its center of gravity elevated well above a support base that dynamic balancing must actively maintain. Disrupting one limb doesn't mean one tripod loses a contact point. It means the entire dynamic system loses coherence. The separatist droid armies called it 6 legs, like it was a shorthand identifier. In the engineering literature, 6 legs is the configuration that stays standing when the terrain decides to fight back. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this one.